There's a moment most people don't talk about. It's not loud. It doesn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It's quiet. It's the moment when you sit next to someone you love and still feel alone. Love isn't proven by words. It's revealed by patterns, by effort, by presence. And sometimes the hardest truth isn't that someone hurt you. It's realizing they never truly showed up in the first place. Today, we're going to talk about 10 signs your partner doesn't love you, even if a part of you is still holding on, hoping they do. Not to break you, but to free you. Love doesn't usually disappear all at once. It fades quietly, not with betrayal or dramatic exits, but with small absences that slowly add up. At first, you don't notice it. You tell yourself they're busy, tired, stressed. You remember how they used to show up, how they used to look at you, how easy it once felt. And you keep believing that version of them is still there, just temporarily hidden. But over time, a pattern forms. Their effort appears only when it suits them, when they're in a good mood, when life is calm, when they want something, when you're the one giving. And the moment effort requires sacrifice, patience, or emotional presence, something changes. They pull back. You feel it in unanswered messages, in plans that are maybe, instead of certain, in conversations that stay shallow because depth would require care. Real love doesn't operate on convenience, but conditional effort does. You start to notice that when they need comfort, you're there. When they're struggling, you listen. When they feel insecure, you reassure them. But when you need the same, there's hesitation, delay, distance. Not always obvious, just enough to make you question yourself. You ask for time together and they say, let's see. You express a need and they respond with silence. You're hurting and they don't lean in, they step away. And still, you stay. Because you remember the good days. That's how conditional effort traps people. It feeds you just enough hope to keep you waiting. They show affection after conflict, but not consistency before it. They give attention when they sense you pulling away, but withdraw once you settle again. It creates a cycle, push and pull, hope and disappointment. Psychologists call this intermittent reinforcement, the same mechanism that makes gambling addictive. When love is unpredictable, the brain works harder to earn it. You begin to associate pain with connection, anxiety with intimacy. You don't feel chosen. You feel tolerated. And slowly, you begin to adjust. You stop asking for too much. You soften your needs before speaking them. You rehearse conversations in your head, making sure you don't sound demanding. You learn their moods, their limits, their emotional weather, and without realizing it, you start shaping yourself around their comfort. That's one of the clearest signs their effort is conditional. You're the one always adapting. Your schedule bends around theirs. Your emotions wait until they're the right headspace. Your expectations shrink to avoid disappointment. You tell yourself this is compromise, but compromise goes both ways. Love is not one person constantly adjusting so the other never has to. Think about how often you're the one initiating. The texts, the calls, the plans, the repair after arguments. When you stop, things don't balance, they collapse. Not because the relationship is fragile, but because you were holding it up alone. Conditional effort also shows up in crisis. When life hits you hard, loss, fear, exhaustion, doubt, you notice who stays. Someone who loves you doesn't disappear when things get heavy. They don't emotionally clock out when you're no longer fun, easy, or low maintenance. They stay present. But conditional love treats your pain like an inconvenience. They listen briefly, then change the subject. They offer advice instead of empathy. They distance themselves emotionally because your vulnerability demands energy they don't want to give. And you start apologizing for needing support. That's when something dangerous happens. You begin to believe love must be earned. That if you're more patient, more understanding, more quiet, more forgiving, then maybe they'll give you what you've been asking for all along. But love is not a reward system. An effort should not depend on how easy you are to love. Data from relationship studies consistently shows that mutual effort, especially during stress, is one of the strongest predictors of long-term satisfaction. When only one partner carries emotional responsibility, resentment builds silently, even in people who love deeply. And you do love deeply. That's why you notice everything. You notice how they can be attentive to others, but distant with you. How they can commit to plans that excite them, but hesitate with yours. How they promise change, but only when they fear losing you. Words come easily when consequences appear. Effort disappears once safety returns. And yet, you still wonder if you're being unfair. Because conditional effort often comes wrapped in kindness, in charm, in moments of warmth that remind you why you stayed. But love is not measured by occasional intensity. It's measured by steady presence. Someone who loves you doesn't make you feel like you have to earn basic care. They don't withdraw affection as punishment. They don't give love in exchange for silence, obedience, or convenience. They show up when it's ordinary, when it's inconvenient, when it's uncomfortable. If effort only exists when it benefits them, that's not love. It's self-interest with emotional access. And the hardest part, conditional effort doesn't always come from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from emotional immaturity, from someone who enjoys being loved more than loving. But the reason doesn't change the impact. You feel unseen, unsteady, always one step away from being dropped. You start measuring your worth by how much effort you can extract from them. You overanalyze their behavior. You cling to small gestures because they feel rare. That's not intimacy. That's survival. Love should feel like relief, not anxiety. Like grounding, not guessing. When effort is real, it doesn't need reminders. It doesn't vanish when things get real. It doesn't make you feel guilty for wanting consistency. If you're always waiting for them to show up the way they used to, ask yourself this: are you missing them? Or are you missing who you thought they were? Conditional effort keeps you living in memory instead of reality. And reality is quieter, but clearer. Because when someone truly loves you, effort isn't something you negotiate. It's something you feel steadily, calmly, without fear of loss. If you've been carrying the weight alone, it's not because you're asking for too much. It's because you're asking the wrong person. And recognizing that isn't weakness. It's the beginning of self-respect. It usually starts small, so small that you question whether it even matters. You bring up something that hurt you. Not angrily, not dramatically, just honestly. And they respond with a sigh, or a shrug, or a phrase that sounds harmless on the surface. You're overthinking. You're too sensitive. It's not that deep. At first, you let it go. You tell yourself they didn't mean it that way. You tell yourself everyone reacts differently. You tell yourself that maybe you really are making a bigger deal out of things than you should. That's how having your feelings minimized begins. Not with cruelty, but with doubt. Doubt planted quietly until you start turning it inward. You stop trusting your emotional instincts. You second, guess what you feel before you even say it out loud. And when you do speak, your words come out softer, careful, already halfway apologizing for existing. Real love doesn't require you to dilute yourself. When your feelings are minimized, you're not being told directly that you're wrong. You're being taught that your inner experience is inconvenient, that your emotions are something to manage, not understand. Something to dismiss, not sit with. You say you felt ignored when they didn't call back. They say they were busy and you shouldn't take it personally. You say a comment hurt you. They say it was a joke and you need to relax. You say you feel lonely even though you're together. They say you're being dramatic. Each time, the message is subtle but consistent. Your feelings are the problem. Over time, this creates a quiet erosion of self-worth. Not because you're weak, but because you're human. Humans need to feel emotionally safe to stay whole. And emotional safety doesn't exist where feelings are constantly dismissed. Psychologists describe this pattern as emotional invalidation. Studies show that long-term invalidation increases anxiety, depression, and self-doubt, even in otherwise confident people. When your emotional reality is repeatedly denied, your nervous system stays on edge. You're always bracing, always unsure if it's safe to speak. And so you adapt. You choose your words carefully. You rehearse conversations in your head. You delete messages before sending them. You start asking yourself, is this worth bringing up? And most of the time, you decide it's not. Silence becomes easier than being dismissed. But silence has a cost, because when you stop expressing how you feel, you don't stop feeling. You just start carrying it alone. And loneliness inside a relationship cuts deeper than loneliness by itself. You might notice that when they're upset, their emotions matter. When they're stressed, tired, frustrated, or hurt, space is made for them. You listen. You adjust. You empathize. But when the roles are reversed, the room suddenly gets smaller. That imbalance is not accidental. It's a dynamic where one person's emotional world is treated as valid and the other's as excessive. And eventually, you internalize it. You start minimizing yourself before anyone else can. You tell friends it's not a big deal. You explain their behavior away. You protect them from being seen clearly, even when you're the one hurting. You do this because you want peace, because conflict feels exhausting, because part of you hopes that if you're easy enough, quiet enough, understanding enough, things will improve. But love doesn't grow in environments where honesty is punished. When your feelings are minimized, responsibility often disappears too. Because if your emotions are framed as irrational, then they never have to take accountability for causing them. You're not met with curiosity. You're met with defensiveness. You're not met with care. You're met with explanations. And explanations are not the same as empathy. Empathy sounds like, I didn't realize that hurt you. Tell me more. Invalidation sounds like, that's not what I meant. Intent is used as a shield. Impact is ignored. And slowly, you begin to feel like you're speaking a language they don't want to learn. The most painful part is that this doesn't always come from someone who doesn't care at all. Sometimes it comes from someone who cares about you, but not enough to sit with discomfort. Someone who values being right more than being connected. Someone who avoids emotional responsibility by labeling your feelings as flaws. But the effect is the same. You feel unseen, and being unseen in love does something profound. It makes you question your reality. It makes you wonder if your needs are unreasonable. It makes you lower the bar, not because it's healthy, but because you're tired of reaching for something that never meets you back. You might start to believe that asking for emotional validation is asking for too much, that needing reassurance is weakness, that expressing pain is inconvenience. None of that is true. Your feelings are information. They are signals, not defects. They tell you when something matters, when a boundary has been crossed, when a connection needs care. In healthy relationships, feelings are not debated. They are acknowledged. Even when there's disagreement, there is respect. Someone who loves you doesn't have to fully understand your emotions to honor them. They don't have to agree with your perspective to treat it as real. They listen. They pause. They take you seriously. When that's missing, the relationship becomes a place where you perform calm instead of feeling safe, where you manage your emotions instead of sharing them, where you shrink your inner world to fit someone else's comfort. And the truth is, no connection is worth that cost. If you've been feeling like your emotions are always too much, ask yourself who taught you that. If you've been told repeatedly that your feelings are wrong, dramatic, or unnecessary, understand this clearly. Your feelings didn't suddenly become a problem. You simply stopped being in a space where they were respected. Being emotionally seen is not a luxury. It's a requirement for love. And the moment you start honoring your feelings instead of dismissing them, something shifts. You stop begging to be understood. You stop explaining your pain. You start listening to yourself again. Because the most important validation you'll ever receive begins the moment you stop doubting your own heart. There's a specific kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being by yourself. It comes from being with someone who should see you, but doesn't. You can be sitting next to them on the couch, sharing the same space, the same routine, even the same bed, and still feel a distance that words can't quite describe. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's a quiet emptiness that settles in slowly until one day you realize you feel more alone with them than you ever did on your own. At first, you tell yourself it's normal. Every relationship goes through phases. Life gets busy. People get tired. You remind yourself of the moments when things felt warm and connected, and you assume this distance is temporary. But time passes and that closeness doesn't return. Instead, the silence grows heavier. You talk, but the conversations don't land. You share stories, but they don't really listen. You speak, and you can tell their mind is somewhere else. They respond, but without curiosity, without follow-up, without presence. Being heard is not the same as being understood. Emotional loneliness shows up when your inner world has no place to go, when you have thoughts, fears, hopes, and reflections, but no space to lay them down safely. You begin to notice that deeper conversations are avoided. When things get personal, they change the subject. When you open up, the energy shifts. So you stop, not all at once, just gradually. You share less, you keep things lighter. You protect the parts of yourself that feel exposed when they're ignored. And without meaning to, you start building walls inside a relationship that was supposed to be a home. Research in emotional psychology shows that emotional intimacy, not physical closeness, is the strongest predictor of relationship satisfaction. You can be affectionate, consistent, even loyal, and still feel deeply alone if emotional connection is missing. Because connection isn't about proximity. It's about presence. You might notice that when something exciting happens, you hesitate before telling them. Not because you don't care, but because you're not sure they'll care. Their reaction feels muted. Their interest feels surface level. And you don't want to feel disappointed again. The same happens with pain. When you're struggling, you feel the urge to handle it yourself. You don't reach out. You don't lean in. Because somewhere along the way, you learn that vulnerability doesn't bring comfort here. It brings awkwardness, or impatience, or silence. That's when loneliness takes root. You begin to feel like a guest in your own relationship. Careful not to disrupt the mood. Careful not to ask for too much. Careful not to need too much. And you start asking yourself quiet questions. Is this what love is supposed to feel like? Why do I feel invisible next to the person who knows me best? Often, this loneliness isn't caused by cruelty. It's caused by emotional absence. By someone who shows up physically but not emotionally. Someone who listens to respond, not to understand. Someone who shares space but not depth. And depth is where intimacy lives. Without it, the relationship becomes functional. You manage life together. You coordinate plans. You exist side by side. But the emotional exchange, the thing that makes love feel alive, slowly fades. You might catch yourself missing them even when they're right there, missing who they used to be, or who you hope they'd become with you. That kind of longing is confusing because it doesn't have a clear target. It's not about distance. It's about disconnection. And the longer it lasts, the more it changes you. You become quieter, more reserved, less expressive. Not because you don't have things to say, but because saying them feels pointless. You start to carry your thoughts alone, convincing yourself that independence is strength, when in reality, it's just self-protection. There's a difference between being strong and being unsupported. Loneliness in a relationship often leads people to question themselves. They wonder if they're too needy, too emotional, too intense. But the truth is simpler and harder at the same time. You're just not being met. Connection requires two people willing to step into each other's inner world. When only one person is reaching, the space between them grows, no matter how close they stand. You might notice that the relationship feels calm, but empty. There are fewer arguments, but also fewer meaningful moments. Less conflict, but also less closeness. And part of you mistakes this for peace. But peace doesn't feel hollow. Real peace feels safe. It feels warm. It feels shared. When you feel alone with someone, your body knows it before your mind accepts it. You feel it in the tension you carry, in the sighs you don't realize you're taking, in the way you retreat inward without consciously choosing to. And still, you stay. Because loneliness can feel familiar. Because leaving feels heavier than enduring. Because you remember how it used to be, and you hope it can return. But hope without connection becomes a quiet kind of pain. Feeling alone in love teaches you something important, even if it hurts. It shows you what you need. It shows you that being chosen isn't about presence, it's about engagement, about someone wanting to know you, not just have you. You deserve a connection where your thoughts are welcomed, your silence is noticed, and your presence makes a difference. Where you don't feel like you're living parallel lives, but a shared one. Loneliness is not a failure on your part. It's a signal that something essential is missing. And listening to that signal is not weakness. It's awareness. Because the moment you stop ignoring that feeling, you stop abandoning yourself. And that's where everything begins to change. Words are easy. They're smooth. They sound good in the moment. Anyone can say the right thing when emotions are high or consequences are close. Anyone can promise change, offer reassurance, or speak about a future that feels safe and hopeful. But words are only the introduction. Actions are the story. When someone's actions don't match their words, confusion becomes a constant background noise in your life. You're told one thing, but you experience another. And slowly, that gap starts to wear you down. They say they care, but they don't show up when it matters. They say you're important, but you're always waiting. They say they'll change, but nothing ever really does. At first, you give them the benefit of the doubt. You believe they mean what they say. You remind yourself that everyone struggles, that change takes time, that nobody is perfect. And maybe that's true. But consistency isn't perfection. It's intention backed by effort. Real love doesn't require you to translate promises into excuses. You start noticing patterns, apologies that come easily, but behavior that stays the same, conversations that end with hope, followed by weeks that feel exactly like before. The same disappointment, just wearing a different explanation. I didn't mean to. I'll do better next time. I just need more time. And time passes. When actions don't follow words, trust doesn't break all at once, it erodes, quietly. You stop fully believing what you're told, even when you want to. You listen, but part of you stays guarded. Not because you're cynical, but because experience has taught you to be careful. You may catch yourself waiting for proof instead of comfort. Watching behavior instead of hearing reassurance. That's not insecurity, that's adaptation. Psychology research consistently shows that trust is built through predictable behavior, not verbal reassurance. The brain looks for patterns, not promises. When those patterns don't align with what's said, the nervous system stays alert. You're never fully relaxed. You're always bracing for the letdown. That's exhausting. You might notice how they speak passionately about the future, but hesitate to commit in the present. They talk about forever, but cancel plans easily. They say you're a priority, but treat you like an option. The contradiction creates a strange kind of attachment. You hold on to their words because they sound like what you want. But you live with their actions, and those actions tell a different story. So you start negotiating with yourself. You tell yourself that intentions matter more than results, that they're trying in their own way, that maybe you're asking for too much. And slowly, the standard shifts, not because you're satisfied, but because you're tired. You lower your expectations to match their effort. You stop bringing things up to avoid disappointment. You accept less, not because it's enough, but because it's what's available. That's how people lose themselves without realizing it. Someone who truly loves you doesn't make you guess which version of them is real. Their words and actions move in the same direction. There's alignment. When they say they'll be there, they are. When they say you matter, their behavior reflects it. Misalignment doesn't always come from bad intentions. Sometimes it comes from fear, from emotional immaturity, from someone who likes the idea of love more than the responsibility of it. Someone who enjoys saying the right things, but struggles to follow through when it requires consistency, sacrifice, or discomfort. But regardless of the reason, the impact is the same. You're left in a constant state of waiting. Waiting for them to become who they say they are. Waiting for the actions to catch up to the promises. Waiting for the relationship to feel stable instead of uncertain. And waiting slowly turns into self-betrayal. Because every time you ignore what they do in favor of what they say, you teach yourself not to trust your own perception. You override your intuition. You silence the part of you that knows something isn't right. You might start noticing that their actions only change when they sense you pulling away. When they fear losing you, effort suddenly appears. Attention increases. Promises get louder. But once you settle back in, the behavior fades again. That's not growth. That's control through inconsistency. Real change doesn't require pressure. It doesn't disappear when the danger passes. It's steady, not reactive. Words without action create emotional whiplash. One moment you feel hopeful. The next you feel foolish for believing again. That cycle can make even strong people doubt themselves. You start asking questions like, am I being unreasonable? Am I expecting too much? Why do I keep feeling disappointed? The answer is simple and hard at the same time. You're responding to reality. Actions are the most honest form of communication. They reveal priorities. They show effort. They expose truth. When someone repeatedly acts in ways that hurt you, neglect you, or make you feel secondary, no amount of beautiful language can erase that. Love isn't proven in speeches. It's proven in small, consistent choices. In showing up when it's inconvenient. In following through when no one is watching. In doing the work, even when it's uncomfortable. If someone tells you they love you but their actions leave you feeling insecure, anxious, or alone, pay attention. Not to punish them. Not to judge them. But to protect yourself. You don't need to confront every inconsistency. Sometimes clarity comes from observation. From noticing what happens when you stop explaining, stop reminding, stop hoping. What remains is the truth. And the truth, while painful, is grounding. because it frees you from confusion. It brings you back to yourself. It reminds you that love should feel steady, not uncertain, safe, not confusing. You deserve a connection where words and actions walk side by side, where promises don't require patience to become real, where you don't have to interpret, translate, or wait. When someone's actions finally align with their words, you don't feel anxious. You feel calm, and calm is how love is supposed to feel. It doesn't happen all at once. You don't wake up one day and realize you're gone. It happens quietly, in small choices, in moments where you tell yourself it's easier not to speak, not to react, not to be fully seen. At first, you're still you. You laugh the same way. You think the same thoughts. You move through the world with the same energy. But slowly, without realizing it, something begins to shift. You start pausing before you talk. You start filtering your reactions. You start asking yourself how they'll take it before asking yourself how you feel. And that's when it begins. Losing yourself in a relationship doesn't mean you stop existing. It means you stop expressing. You stop honoring the parts of you that once felt natural, alive, and whole. You adapt so much to someone else's comfort that you forget what your own comfort feels like. You tell yourself it's compromise, that relationships require adjustment. And they do, but real compromise doesn't require self-erasure. You notice that you're not as excited about the things you used to love. Hobbies fall away. Friendships grow quieter. Not because you don't care, but because your emotional energy is being spent somewhere else, managing the relationship, reading the room, keeping the peace. You become careful. Careful not to upset them. Careful not to ask for too much. Careful not to trigger conflict. And that carefulness slowly replaces authenticity. Psychologists often talk about the concept of the false self in relationships when someone suppresses their true thoughts, feelings, and desires to maintain connection. Over time, this creates emotional fatigue and a deep sense of disconnection from one's identity. You may still function, but you don't feel like yourself. You might notice it in the mirror, not physically, but emotionally. The confidence you once had feels distant. The certainty in your voice softens. You second guess your instincts. You start needing reassurance for things you once trusted yourself to know. You begin shrinking to fit a space that was never meant to hold all of you. Losing yourself often starts with good intentions. You want the relationship to work. You want harmony. You want love to last, so you adjust. You bend. You give more. But when giving isn't met with care, it turns into self-abandonment. You stop bringing up what bothers you because it leads nowhere. You stop expressing needs because they feel inconvenient. You stop dreaming out loud because they're not received with enthusiasm. And slowly, your inner world becomes quieter, not peaceful, muted. You might notice that you feel tired in a way that rest doesn't fix. That's not physical exhaustion. That's emotional depletion. It comes from constantly monitoring yourself, constantly holding back, constantly choosing someone else's comfort over your truth. You start telling yourself stories to make sense of it. That you've matured, that you've changed, that this is just what adult relationships look like. But growth doesn't make you smaller. Love doesn't make you disappear. When you're losing yourself, you may also find yourself justifying things you never would have accepted before. Disrespect becomes misunderstanding. Neglect becomes business. Emotional distance becomes independence. You move the line again and again, not because you're okay with it, but because you're trying to survive within it. There's a moment many people experience, often alone, where they realize they don't recognize themselves anymore. Maybe it's when they're with old friends and feel out of place. Maybe it's when they remember a version of themselves that felt freer, louder, more alive. And that memory hurts, because you didn't lose that person overnight. You gave them up slowly, piece by piece, hoping it would bring you closer to someone else. But closeness built on self-erasure is fragile. It demands that you keep disappearing to keep the connection intact. And the more you disappear, the more hollow the relationship feels. You might start feeling disconnected not just from yourself, but from the world. Things that once brought joy feel dull. Decisions feel harder. You feel unsure, even when you shouldn't be. That uncertainty is a signal. Your sense of self is not meant to be negotiable. It's meant to be expressed, explored, and respected. In healthy love, you don't lose yourself, you expand. You become more of who you already are. When that doesn't happen, something is wrong. Not with you, but with the environment you're in. Losing yourself often makes people afraid of being alone because they've already been alone for a long time, just quietly, inside a relationship. And leaving feels like stepping into the unknown, even though staying means continuing to fade. But the truth is, reconnecting with yourself is not about blame. It's about remembrance. Remembering what you value, remembering what excites you, remembering how it feels to speak without fear. You don't have to become someone new. You just have to stop abandoning who you already are. The moment you begin listening to your own voice again, something shifts. The fog lifts. The heaviness starts to make sense. You realize that the discomfort you've been feeling isn't weakness, it's resistance. It's the part of you that knows you were meant for more than shrinking. You are not too much. You were just giving too much of yourself to a place that couldn't hold you. And choosing to come back to yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. Because the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you have with yourself. And no love is worth losing that. Here's the hard truth. Someone can care about you, enjoy you, even need you, and still not love you in the way you deserve. Love is not confusion. Love is not anxiety. Love is not feeling unseen. Love feels safe. Love feels steady. Love feels like home, not a place you're always afraid of losing. If this message resonates with you, don't rush to blame yourself. Awareness is strength, and choosing yourself is not selfish, it's necessary. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop begging for love and start honoring your worth.